All right, hello, welcome everyone to Star Trek from the Holodeck. I am Michael, your host, as usual. In the studio with me is David. Hello, David.
Hello, everybody.
Okay, so we just finished watching the penultimate episode of Strange New Worlds Season 3, titled Terrarium. The episode is written by Alan B. McElroy and directed by Andrew Coates. This episode had a lot to offer.
Particularly with one of the storylines that basically we've been really interested in, which is Ortegas.
Yeah, that's something that we have been hoping the writers would return to. They have alluded to it throughout the previous 8 episodes. In fact, David, I believe last week during our last discussion, you had even said, well, is this the connection that we're going to get? Is this it from episode 8?
Yeah.
You know, the conversation between Ortegas and Beto, the crux of their issues stemmed from the Gorn fallout. So we had assumed, is this it? Is this what we've been waiting for? And thankfully, David, that was not it.
Yes.
This episode was the payoff. And even though this episode had some issues, and we're going to get to those issues towards the end of the show, or if organically they happen to pop up, we'll just tackle them. But for the most part, this episode was very powerful, and it harkened back to Star Trek's deep empathy. That's one thing that we don't really get into a lot in terms of Star Trek, but anyone that has sat down for more than one season of any Star Trek series will quickly realize that there is a lens of empathy that is used in order for many of the viewers to understand the trauma, the tribulations, and the issues that certain characters may be going through. But not just our core characters, but oftentimes our villains or the alleged antagonist that may not be a so-called evil villain, but the antagonist of a series or an episode. Oftentimes we learn something new about them and we realize what? Oh, it was a matter of miscommunication. And the most recent example of that is from Star Trek Discovery with Species 10C, where we had to understand these creatures in order to empathize. And then what happened? Resolve and peace. So across Season 3, bringing it back to Strange New Worlds, Ortegas' arc has been tightly bound to the Gorn, beginning with her raw anger and the PTSD in the aftermath of, what was it, Hegemony Part 2, right? Yeah. And surfacing in later episodes whenever the Gorn's presence or cosmology was redefined. For example, the Vesda episode. So Ortegas consistently embodied the voice of distrust along with Lan, and that includes vengeance, unable to imagine coexistence where others sought scientific or moral nuance. Those are elements that we saw throughout the season.
Mm-hmm.
Terrarium marks the payoff to that buildup. Stripped of weapons and allies, Ortegas survives, or must survive, by not killing her enemy, but by forging a fragile bond with a fellow pilot who is Gorn, who happens to be stranded just like herself.
Yes.
And her recovery doesn't come through destruction, and this is where the emphasis on Trek is really about, the moral and ethical implications and foundations. It doesn't come through destruction, her recovery, but it comes through empathy, improvisation, and, keyword here, unity. And by doing this, they reframe the Gorn not just as predators again, but as individuals now, which recenters Ortegas within Trek's ethos of diplomacy over vengeance. And in doing so, this episode becomes a de facto prequel to the original series classic episode Arena.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what this episode does, David.
And that's the thing too, is like one of the things that I really took away from this episode is like, our one criticism of the last episode was there was too much going on. You had too many characters, basically too many storylines trying to bunch together and try to make sense of it. In here, it's almost like they said, okay, we're going to go back to the well that we know Star Trek works well in, where you have these episodes that focus in on 1 to 2 characters. That's it. You have your outside characters. Yes, we saw the Enterprise crew, but the main focus was Ortegas and the Gorn pilot. And so many Trek episodes in the past have become classic because they just focus on 2 main characters.
Right.
Where it's about, just like what you said, the communication, the empathy, because that's how you bring in what Star Trek is supposed to be about.
Yeah, it's about in this particular situation, it's about conflict resolution.
Yeah, it's not about, the flashy lights and the spaceships. Star Trek is about human nature, how we communicate with each other, how we talk to each other,
right?
Why it works, and putting it in the lens of a humanoid being trying to communicate to an alien subject.
Yeah.
And if you go back and look at all of Star Trek's history, some of the best episodes in Star Trek's 60-year history has that format. I mean, one that comes to mind automatically is In the Pale Moonlight, that I have written here that's a personal favorite of mine from DS9 with that just focuses on Sisko and Garrick, 2 characters.
Yeah.
And it's basically them essentially battling each other's morality. And here you have a parallel with Ortegas, where she's dealing with a being that is totally alien to her, and you throw in the fact that it deals with her trauma. And it makes her question her own morality when it comes to wanting vengeance on this creature. It's, do you want to survive, or do you want your vengeance?
Yeah.
And something just as simple as that brings out so much good storytelling. And that's what I brought out. This is what I was saying for the past 2 episodes was missing from Strange New Worlds.
Yeah. David, you're right. I agree with everything you just said, and you said it better than I could have. I also want to add, though, because it made me think a bit more. So, one thing that, I don't want to get too political, but we are here. So, one thing that Star Trek has had to contend with is difference. Much of liberal humanist philosophy, which is what Star Trek is built on, is about getting rid of this supposed difference, that we're humans, that's our commonality. We're human beings. And in today's liberal climate, it is all about difference and recognizing difference. And sometimes that becomes a weighty type of way of doing television, because rather than showing unity, we show difference. And even though you can have unity within difference, oftentimes people don't understand that. And here we have an episode where it isn't about difference. Yes, there is obvious difference, but what you have here is a very human story that disregards difference and foregrounds unity and compromise as the key founding elements for survival.
Yes.
And for trauma resolution. So that's another strength of this particular episode. And even I want to congratulate and applaud the writers that this is what we talked about either last episode or the episode prior, that Star Trek has to constantly remind people in this modern era what Star Trek is, because the chasm politically in 60 years has just grown.
Mm-hmm.
So people may not understand how or what Star Trek's built on in terms of its socio-political foundations and philosophical outlook. So you have to constantly remind them. And rather than falling into the trendy pitfalls that many television shows do in fact fall into today, because political trends are just naturally and organically embedded into contemporary works, television, movies, music, whatever it may be, media in general. Whereas with Star Trek, you have to be very careful not to slip into those trends, because Star Trek does not work within trends. And that's why an episode like this, where they foreground to a degree difference, but difference should never get in the way of unity.
Yes.
Because unity is the most important thing when you look at the world of Star Trek. And that's why this episode, in a lot of ways, really does win the day for me. And it's why it is a very strong episode, despite some of the things that I feel they could have done without. And even when you look at some of the complaints online, I can't disagree that this episode isn't particularly unique. It feels like we've seen an episode like this before, where we have an away team member get stranded. They have to work with an alien being. They overcome communication issues, and in the end, they work together. We've seen so many episodes like that, but I don't feel like that's a negative. I feel like that's a template. Like Star Trek has a template, and now if you're doing 1-to-1, then I would point and say, well, you're a hack. You're just ripping off what we saw before. They're doing different things within the template, and that's what makes uniqueness. So when people say, we've seen this before, this feels derivative, I would argue, well, Star Trek operates within a template.
Yeah.
And what makes it different is the person that is filling in the template itself.
I think that basically because I've seen those complaints too about this episode where people say, oh, it's not unique enough. And I'm like going, but just to your point, Star Trek is, at the end of the day, Gene Roddenberry's point of Star Trek is to show morality. It's a teaching program.
It's a human project.
It's a human,
That's what I believe he's called it. Yeah, it's a human project.
I'm sorry, in order for you to actually understand or even do a human project, yes, you have to do similar stories to re-emphasize that type of morality, because at the end of the day, Star Trek is partly an educational program. It's supposed to teach people about morality. You just don't learn morality from one tale.
Yeah.
You have to learn morality multiple times.
David, you are spot on today.
And that's the thing that because when I see people today writing about reviews about this episode, I think that people are forgetting that, yes, we want unique storytelling. We do. I mean, I'm one of those people that actually, champions for that. However, in order to get sometimes unique storytelling, you have to use prior templates, just like what you said, to tell your own take on morality.
Yeah. And also, David, again, we've said this a couple of times already in just the opening 13 minutes. This is a 60-year running franchise.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, there's going to be some similarities there because, many of the original Star Trek viewers, let's just be brutally honest here, are dead.
Yes. I like how you said that.
I mean,
it almost was like Kirk saying, let them die.
And also, the next generation viewers who were 40 years old, late 30s, they're dead. Or nearly dead.
Nearly dead. Look at us.
I'm beating down death's door. So that being said, you have to remember that me and you and some of the Star Trek elites, we may feel like this is similar because we are Star Trek nerds that watch every single episode, every single series. A lot of people aren't like that. So these types of reminders, I don't feel like they deter from a season. And I don't feel like you can point to it and say, well, because you're doing this, this is a mark of an unsuccessful episode. I completely disagree. And I love your point you brought up that, you can't just teach the values of Star Trek in just one iteration. You got to keep doing it. I mean, that's how you learn things in college in general, or school, just at large. You don't just learn multiplication once. You learn it throughout your entire run of school. So you master it, and they expand on it, and you learn a little bit more and more and more and more and more. And that's I like how you say that, because you're right. Like, in order for us to understand what Star Trek is, there's a corpus, and you have to keep adding to it.
Exactly.
Yeah. So ultimately, David, why all this matters, if it isn't clear yet. This arc brings Ortegas into alignment with Trek's core ethos, survival through cooperation, even with so-called former enemies. It also reframes the Gorn, which is going to be a very important topic in a moment here, not only as cosmic predators, but as individuals, pilots, survivors who can be met halfway, people we can actually communicate with. So now, in the earlier part of the season, it was floated that perhaps the Gorn are so different from us, we don't fully understand them. In a cosmological sense, that remains true. But now we also learn, which is a really big part of Star Trek, we learn that there's more to them than simply their cosmological urges, that they are, in fact, individuals who understand, to a degree, humanity.
Yes.
So that's an interesting component as well. So ultimately, the episode becomes the payoff we've been waiting for most of the season in connection to Ortegas. The moment her pilot identity, mechanical ingenuity, and the simmering trauma all converge into a lesson of unity over vengeance. She was able to work through her pain and trauma through this very unification.
Mm-hmm.
And the Gorn, through its loneliness, which is very sad, learned to view a human as something other than an enemy. It's a very smart, very Star Trek episode.
Oh, yeah. And it's actually a very, even outside of Star Trek, it's a very tried and true bit of storytelling. You take two individuals from opposing sides, you force them into a situation that is bigger than them.
Kind of like Enemy Mine with
Mine.
Dennis Quaid and Louis Gossett Jr.
Yeah.
You remember that movie?
Yes. Where Louis Gossett Jr. got pregnant.
Yeah. I got 4 fingers.
I got 4 fingers.
Uncle.
But like, when even like if you look at throughout all of media and all of film, that type of story right there is used a lot.
Yeah.
Because it's supposed to be a type of template or type of stereotype that allows the writer to basically tell a human story, tell a story about rising above one's differences and being able to coexist.
Yeah.
And going back to Star Trek, that's the whole point of the Federation. Me and you have talked about this in nauseum, is like, a lot of fans seem to forget TNG, the Federation, by the time we get to Picard's era, there is no war. There is no like differences. No one cares about money.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about enlightenment and pushing the human nature, because up to that point, humanity is all united. Like, there's no fighting. We're all converged as one and coexisting on a small little planet, and we're trying to space out into areas that are unknown to us.
Yeah. So Dave, another thing that the episode does is I suppose you can call it cleanup. It does a little cleanup work, which it needs to do, because again, when you have prequel series that are a part of a 60-year running franchise, well, you're going to have to do some cleanup, because you have to break things sometimes, right?
Yes.
I mean, Discovery broke things. Deep Space Nine broke things. You know what? Let me use Deep Space Nine. Discovery's too new.
and it's too fresh.
Yeah, and I don't want to have to pull up the doll, and show, and like, where did Discovery touch you? Like, I don't want to get into that. Deep Space Nine broke a lot of things, and I believe most people can now look back at Star Trek objectively. Even the people that didn't necessarily love that series can look back and realize, okay, well, now that it's all said and done, when I screamed foul ball, let's say in season 3, because they did something, well, by the end of the run, through recontextualization and cleanup, they managed to make that thing that made me so mad, they ended up fixing it and fleshing it out and now it makes sense what they were trying to do. Sometimes you have to break in order to understand, in order to fix, in order to rejuvenate, and that's largely what Discovery did. Largely, Discovery worked within a cultural moment where we were distrustful of institutions. Society in 2017, and even more so now, we are distrustful of institutions, and that's why Star Trek Discovery was built on the very idea of distrust in institutions and the needed renewal of the Federation. So when you look back at now, or I should say when you look now at what Strange New Worlds is doing, proper Star Trek performs what I call diegetic cleanup or maintenance. An idea is introduced, and then it is explained and or fleshed out in a way that works to align itself with Star Trek's core foundational elements. And oftentimes, before we see the end result or the end picture, and I'm talking even sometimes the gap between a season 1, let's say, and a season 4, suddenly we'll take something that they'll take something that we didn't like, and they flesh it out, and suddenly we understand the bigger picture because we have all those pieces.
Yes.
The treatment of the Gorn, for example, across season 3 in Strange New Worlds has gradually shifted from blunt villainy towards something more nuanced and unstable. Early on, the Gorn were framed as pure threat or evil in the simplest sense, predatory monsters whose appearance re-triggered Ortegas' trauma as well as Lyan's history. But as the season developed, the writers have reposition them within a larger cosmology, and it's less a moral adversary than a natural force. That's what we learned several episodes ago. Something predatory, but not malicious, woven into the ecology of the galaxy. And this cosmic framing, Dave, suggested that labeling them evil, I believe is what we surmised, was a human projection, out of step with Trek's ethos of misunderstanding as the root of conflict. So by the time we reach Terrarium, that reframing now crystallizes into the personal. The Gorn are no longer faceless monsters, but now individuals capable of cooperation, play, and even solidarity in shared survival.
Yeah. And that's why I think a lot of the choices, the creative choices they made in this episode in particular were really strong. Having, say, someone like La'an. La'an was the one who shot the Gorn in the end.
Yeah.
Having her do it makes sense because of who La'an is, but also in a lot of ways.
You mean her history?
Her history.
Yeah.
And
also she's the security officer.
She's a security officer.
She didn't know what was going on. It all makes sense.
But La'an is the perfect foil to where Ortegas is. Because La'an, not saying that La'an is thinking wrong, she's actually kind of representing us as humanity, what we would do. Normally, without going through what Ortegas went through, we would probably have seen the Gorn, seen it as a threat automatically, and shot it because, oh, well, my friend's in danger. My friend is in danger. I'm going to shoot you first. Shoot first, ask questions later.
Did you say shoot questions?
Shoot questions. But shoot first and ask questions later. And I like the fact that they chose La'an as that character because it softens the blow for us as the audience to kind of accept that, okay, yeah, this is the story of the moral of the story.
Yeah.
So where we left off with Ortegas, because Ortegas is the enlightened character in this episode, she's the only one that actually has learned this lesson. So having La'an be the one to actually shoot the Gorn softens the blow for us. It's basically to emphasize us as the audience to actually say, okay, this is where we're at, but look at Ortegas. Ortegas is the example of where we need to go, where we need to be.
Yeah. Well, it is smart. I really liked how they took the duality of terror and vengeance, and they paired it up with the duality of empathy and loss.
Yes.
That is just incredibly intelligent it shows a very deep understanding of what Star Trek should be doing. Like, if we're talking about this human project, this is the human project.
Well, dude, also it helps that Melissa Navia, who plays Ortegas, she acted her ass off in this episode. Like, me and you have been actually criticizing, we need more of Ortegas in the screen. Yeah, we love Anson, and we like Spock, and we like Una, we like Uhura, we like Kirk. But we would like to see more of Ortegas also.
Yeah.
And like, we finally get a full episode, and she did not hold back, which I love in her performance.
Yeah.
I mean, she carried this episode just as good as if Anson was. We did an Anson episode.
Yeah. Well, David, it's not like Ortegas. She's not like my favorite character. I do find her incredibly interesting. I don't think there's ever been a Star Trek character that I don't like. I struggle with Stamets for a couple years because he had no redeeming qualities. He was always morose. He was unhappy. He was an asshole. It just constantly whining. Finally, they fixed him, and I was okay with him the last couple seasons. But other than Stamets, I've never disliked any of our Star Trek crew.
What about Jake?
Jake, I just felt like was kind of pointless unless he was connected to Cisco. And the stories they told about the two of them were very powerful episodes, and some of the best episodes during Star Trek Deep Space Nine's run. With Ortegas, Dave, it was simply like, why? That was the question we had. Why have we not been given an episode about Ortegas? It seems very strange that she's always front and center. And I would probably say, David, if we went back and we were to take some detailed notes, you could probably make an argument that Ortegas probably has the most screen time of any character in Star Trek Strange New Worlds because she's always front and center. And they're always giving her lines. But she hasn't had her episode yet.
Yes.
And this is the first episode that we could definitely label as an Ortegas episode, and it didn't disappoint. That was the thing I was hoping we wouldn't get to, like, meaning like that would be my consensus of the episode by the end. Like, well, we finally were given an Ortegas episode, and fuck, I wish we didn't get it because it was very poor. It's not the case. It was a very strong episode. In fact, David, there was also, getting back to what this episode did, so we were talking about diegetic cleanup or maintenance, right?
Yeah. So
the alignment that we were talking about, this maintenance, could also be. Let me find a way to say this. So this alignment we were talking about is more about adherence, I would say. So when we're working through all of these Ortegas things, as I was talking about, recontextualizing the Gorn again, it's adherence to what Star Trek is. But there's also what you would call a more direct cleanup. And this is less about adherence to philosophical commitments and more to canon itself.
Mm-hmm.
So the setup in Terrarium does echo familiar territory as Strange New Worlds has and continues to lean into canon. Obviously, this is a prequel series. They're going to do that at times. It makes sense. This particular episode positions itself right close to the original series, which I believe at this point we're about 7 years away. Story-wise, in terms of canon. This episode becomes essentially, because of its positioning, a de facto prequel. Not just a prequel series, but this episode in itself could be categorized as a de facto prequel of the original series episode, The Arena, because you have the introduction of the Gorn and the Metrons in that episode.
Yes.
So now here we are with the Metrons making their appearance in connection to the Gorn, and it previews or foreshadows the events of the Arena. It foreshadows the Metron's curiosity with the so-called two barbaric species, that is the Gorn and humans. And now, when we get to the original series episode, where Kirk is infamously put up against a Gorn in a rather ludicrous and silly episode, but it is iconic.
Yes.
seeing Kirk fight the green lizard.
that just stumbles towards him.
Yeah. So this foreshadowing does help in terms of canon make sense of all the Gorn stuff now. And perhaps the war, how we can now read this, is the skirmishes between the Gorn and the humans are what effectively attracted the attention of the Metrons.
Because, like, at the end of the day, especially with the Metrons and the way their species functions, they're different from the Q. Like, the Q continuum always watches over us and holds us in judgment, as Q put it, if we belong in the stars. The Metrons have already made their mind. They see us as lower beings, where it's like, look at the barbaric species fighting amongst each other, because the Metrons have risen above that.
Yeah.
They essentially, their species, if I'm not correct, especially when I looked up the histories of the species in the Star Trek website, the Metrons have no desire for war. All they really desire is to understand the universe. That's it. They want to know why these species do these certain things, and they view every single species as almost like us going to the zoo. Right. So when they took the humans and the Gorn, they wanted to actually see, okay, well, can either of these species rise above? Can they be more than their barbaric selves? And that was the experiment. That was the experiment of the arena. And then here in Ortegas, just like what you said, it becomes more personal, and it kind of lays those seeds in the Metrons, saying, oh, there's more to these species than just us watching them like humans watching monkeys in the zoo flinging their poo at the wall. And that's the main difference between the Metrons and the Q.
Yeah. But in terms of just story, David, like the episode, would you say it offers like justification now because so many people questioned? If you go to Reddit, the Star Trek subreddit, you'll see a lot of people questioning why the Gorn. And I don't believe the writers were thinking, you know what we're going to do? We're going to end up leading all of this Gorn stuff into a single episode that serves as a direct prequel to the arena episode. I feel that the writers, understanding that they have made some canon adjustments, have fucked with canon a bit, it seems like this is them aligning that and making justification for that. So with Strange New Worlds expanding this Gorn exposure, right, and using the very limited knowledge that we even had of them from the original series, it does seem like this is them justifying that and perhaps fleshing it out so that we have more context to the arena episode. And if that's what they're doing as well, that's fine. As long as you're not stepping on toes and destroying things from before, I'm okay with a little recontextualization. It makes sense. And also, I don't think that the Metron's inclusion here, even though I'm definitely a stickler for non-fan service, I despise fan service. I don't think it's needed. I don't believe the Metron's inclusion in this particular episode was simply for fan service. To me, it serves a higher purpose. Canon cleanup, yes. And unlike the somewhat superficial inclusion of the Q in the previous episode, Wedding Bell Blues, right?
Yes, with Trelane.
The Metrons feel narratively necessary. Whereas the Q and Trelane felt like simply fan service. However, now that we see what they're doing with the Gorn and the Metrons, perhaps the Q and Trelane was also canon cleanup.
Yeah. I mean,
I believe we said that. Didn't we mention that when we were discussing the episode, that it looks like maybe they're simply looking to consolidate and clean things up a bit by combining Trelane with the Q continuum?
Oh, yeah, because like at the end of the day, now that we're looking at it, I mean, a lot of the narrative beats they're doing, particularly with bringing in quote unquote Easter eggs with certain species that are coming back into Star Trek, a lot of them seem tied to broadening out what me and you have thrown around as the cosmological side to Star Trek. I mean, you have Trelane and the Q. You have the Vizda, where you introduce the species that essentially possess people like demons, like the Pa race.
Yeah.
And then you have, you know, the recontextualization of the Gorn from, just like what you mentioned, a brute force species to something more cosmologically driven. Like they're a force of nature practically.
Right.
They're driven by like these moments that the universe needs its own personal cleanup. And what happens? The Gorn show up.
Right.
And now you have the Metrons showed up. I mean, at this point, Mike, I'm expecting this season. I kept thinking to myself, okay, there's a lot of really cool species they can bring in to kind of tie this theme that they've been doing, where it's like we're trying to broadening out the idea of there's more than just the normal humanoid species.
Okay, so are you trying to say, let me see if I'm following. Okay, because, and I do like, if I'm understanding you correctly, I like your thoughts, your thought process, but tell me if I'm understanding and interpreting correctly. So because this season has focused a lot on the cosmological, you're dealing with the Gorn, who have been described as cosmic, okay? You now have Q and Trelane introduced into Strange New Worlds, and they are cosmic beings.
Cosmological, yeah.
You have the Vesda, which are cosmic beings. You also have the aliens, the unknown alien species that created the prison for the Vesda, and they are cosmic beings. Now you have the Metrons being introduced in the third season, and they are cosmic beings. So what are they doing? If a theme for this season has connections to cosmic beings or cosmic entities, then I would assume that moving into the season 3 finale, that payoff is going to come through. And if it doesn't, it seems very strange that they're focusing so much on the cosmological.
Yes. And here's the thing. I've heard some really cool ideas. I'm calling them ideas. I'm not calling them, like speculations or tinfoil hat ideas now, because this season in particular, Star Trek fans have been really good at actually discussing what Star Trek fans have been really good at discussing the possibilities of what the Star Trek universe is now. And especially after Wedding Day Blues, when they basically said, oh, they're basically kind of hinting that Trelane was connected to the Q.
I don't know, hinting. I think maybe to like the casual viewer, hinting. But for those that know, I mean, that was John Delancey's
voice.
Yeah.
But like for all stakes and purposes, the one of the coolest things that I didn't think about was they have a way now in the new era of Star Trek of trying to combine not just seasons of a particular series, but all of their shows together as one. Yeah. They all deal with each other. There is one thread that has not been touched on for a while from Discovery that people have been saying, you know what? Wait a minute, time out. That storyline just like disappeared when they showed up, which was the Guardians of Forever. When you had Michelle Yeoh's character literally be taken from by the Guardians of Forever, and the Guardians of Forever basically said they are on the run because there's a war going on.
Well, no, they went into hiding.
They went into hiding
because of the temporal war.
The temporal war, right? Yeah. So like everyone was like basically saying, someone pointed out that every single series has dealt with at least one temporal event. It's almost like building up slowly. Even Picard, you have the season with Q talking about Q's life coming to an end, and him talking about how the temporal universe works in Star Trek. And then you have Discovery, Guardians of Forever. You have Strange New Worlds now with a particular season that actually has all of the races show up, particularly that deal with the cosmological side of Star Trek.
But what is they're talking about this, David, but what are you trying to say? Are they trying to say something about it, or is this okay, go ahead.
I'm thinking that basically in the season finale, because one of the things that me and you have been pondering about this season is what the hell is our main story? What is this all leading up to? And I think in the season finale, it's going to lead to actually a big reveal of cosmological significance.
Okay, I would agree. I would hope so, because everything they're laying out this season would point to that. That was my point a moment ago, that it would make sense. I don't know the connections from Picard that you were making or Discovery, like why that matters, other than these are habits that they do. But that's all. Those are tropes. Are you trying to say that they're going to connect events from Picard and Discovery?
Yeah.
Okay, David, if they do that, I quit. we don't need some grand connection.
That's the thing.
The connection is the trope themselves. We understand the purpose of cosmic beings. Gene Roddenberry set it up years ago. I believe in an interview, he said that the reason why they use these reoccurring godlike beings is, number one, it's part of Roddenberry's humanist ethos. In multiple interviews, he has explained that the superior alien judge device let Trek dramatize what he saw as humanity's evolutionary potential. We are still violent, still struggling, but capable of restraint and moral growth. And in Arena, Kirk refuses to kill the Gorn, right? Demonstrating the precise quality that Roddenberry believed would carry humanity into a better future. And also, there's literary and philosophical lineage there. So he uses literature oftentimes because of its impact and what it means, that particular literature. That's why there's so many Roman and Greek influences in Star Trek, because Star Trek is built on the Western philosophical canon.
There you go.
So if they're trying to connect all these cosmic beings, I feel like they're not understanding the point of the cosmic beings. The cosmic beings aren't designed for anything other than to be a device to help us understand ourselves as human beings.
And that's why I feel that this is an exciting idea, but it's also a very dangerous idea, because you can see, just like what you brought up, the issues that you would do tackling something like this. However, when we look at like what Strange New Worlds has done at this point, this seems to be the breadcrumbs that they're laying down.
I hope it's not, David, because Strange New Worlds, this is where my negative comes in. Mm-hmm. I'm worried because are they using things from Star Trek's past because it allows them to adhere to Star Trek's philosophical principles and its liberal humanist agenda, or are they doing it simply for reasons dealing with storytelling? Like, we can't tell stories of our own, so we're going to rely on the past. And to me, this is where I am starting to get annoyed with Strange New Worlds. I understand that it's a prequel series, but at this point, season 3 is not able to stand on its own.
No.
And I feel like that is just a travesty, because there are a lot of great moments this season.
There is.
A lot of great moments.
Good episodes, too.
Can you imagine if The Next Generation came out and every single episode was in some way connected to the original series? Or Enterprise came out and every episode was connected to the original series in some way, or Next Generation or Deep Space Nine or Voyager, and they were trying to connect things for reasons that didn't make sense to their own season. They're like, well, okay. And even if it does make sense for their own season, like for Strange New Worlds I'm talking about, who gives a shit? Yeah. Use the past simply as ways to connect things that must be connected, to create canon consistency, to create diegetic consistency. Do not use the past to write your actual stories, because then what you're doing is you're not actually writing your own stories. You're simply borrowing, recontextualizing, and then pawning it off as something unique and new. And season 3 is starting to feel a lot like they're just borrowing things from different areas of Star Trek to tell their stories. And I feel like that's a sign of lack of confidence.
Yeah.
When you're a confident writing room, you rely on your own writing. The only thing you should be using from Star Trek is the Bible, the Star Trek Bible, the do's and don'ts, and the canon as well. This is what we can do. This is what we can't do. And I'm not saying you can't make direct connections. You can. But when your entire season amounts to connecting to something we've seen before, and I know I'm being possibly hyperbolic here by saying everything, but at least 80% of the season has not been unique.
Yeah. Sooner or later, I think the best way to put it is a way of thinking for me, especially when I'm thinking about it now, is like, sooner or later, you want to stop using your hand-me-downs from your siblings.
Yeah.
And you want to create your own personality, your own individuality, and you want to start using your own shit. And that's just speaking from a sibling who is the youngest. I'm the youngest out of my siblings. And that's how I feel Strange New Worlds is at, particularly with this season, is like, they're constantly dealing with their older, more established siblings' shit than themselves. Like, you have these moments where, particularly my favorite episode is the Vizda one, because that was their own shit. You brought in something different, you brought in something unique, but it was still tailored to something that was thematically tied to what Star Trek is. Yeah. When they bring in shit like Trelane and Q and Metrons and the Gorn.
Even the Gorn, yeah.
You're just basically taking your older sibling stuff and saying, oh, I'm going to use this.
Well, David, okay, 80% of the season has amounted to nothing new. Even the episode What Starfleet Is, explaining to us, we already know what Star Trek is. You didn't really do anything new here.
Yes.
Then let's take... What's the other strong episode of the season that we really liked? The Adventure Hour episode. Okay, yes. So you use an episode to parody what? The original series Star Trek. It's not unique. You're playing with past Star Trek. It's interesting what they did with it. It's clever. Mm-hmm. I would even say intelligent. But is it unique to Strange New Worlds? Are they saying something unique to Strange New Worlds? The reason why, David... And I get this question a lot from Star Trek fans. You call yourself a Star Trek fan, but your favorite Star Trek series is Deep Space Nine, and now you even talk great about Discovery. And no, I'm not a...
You're not bitter?
I'm not a contrarian. I don't like to just say things that I know is going to rile people up. This is the reason why. Because Deep Space Nine is core Star Trek, and Discovery is. They're not perfect. Star Trek Deep Space Nine is close to being perfect. Star Trek Discovery is far from perfect, but that doesn't make it a bad series. There are a lot of writing issues. But as a piece of Star Trek, I've never had a problem with it as a piece of Star Trek. As a piece of television, as a piece of media, I have some critical issues with it. Mm-hmm. But in terms of Star Trek, they adhered to what Star Trek is. You may not like what they did. You may not be overly interested in what they did. You might even think Discovery is overly woke. I've heard that. But it is Star Trek. Mm-hmm. And they did their Star Trek without overly relying on the past. Yeah. That is why I like Deep Space Nine and why I like Discovery so much, and even large portions of Voyager, because I felt like what they were doing was unique. They weren't trying to reinvent the wheel, but they also were trying to build their own show, their own history, their own lineage, their own legacy. And whereas Strange New Worlds, if you look at the first season, was more about delving into Star Trek's legacy, that's what the first season of Strange New Worlds did. Because people might point and say, well, they did the same thing in the first season. You didn't have no complaints.
Because that's the point of the first season.
The first season was about legacy. It wasn't about regurgitating things we've seen in the past. It was reminding us of the legacy, the lasting legacy of the Enterprise crew and Star Trek. but it wasn't using everything it possibly can from the past in order to form its season. Flash forward to season 3, that's all season 3 is.
Yeah. Because it says a lot that basically, when I look back at my notes of the shows that we've covered up to this point, the only episode that truly feels unique to me, and in my notes, the word unique actually is only uttered once throughout the entire time we've considered it, is through the lens of time. And that's the one with the Vizda.
Yeah.
The Vizda and the zombies.
The Kafori episode.
The Kafori episode. And it's like, that is what Strange New Worlds really needed to focus more on. If they're trying to branch out the cosmological theme of Star Trek, fine. Do something like that.
Do you think part of the reason why, David, they're relying so heavily on the past is because they only have 10 episodes? So
I think so.
They don't have enough time to effectively build out their own season?
I think so. I've always been on that side with you when it comes to having a shortened season in television does not give a lot of writers a lot of breathing room. Yes, people can actually come up with coherent storylines in film and television under 2 hours.
And even certain TV shows that are built, if that is built in its DNA,
if it's
to be
built
an 8 to 10 episode season, and that's how it functions and works, okay, there are shows that can successfully do that. Star Trek doesn't operate under those types of constraints very well.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is like when you're dealing with a larger franchise, a larger IP, the fan base that's in it is expecting you to really dive into the universe.
Yeah.
And you can't do that with just 6 to 10 episodes. That's really difficult unless you make your production really small, your character number really small, and just focus on a few people. When you're, especially in Strange New Worlds, how many times, Mike, have we said, hey, where's Ortegas? Hey, where's Leanne? How about a story about Una?
Yeah.
And yeah, it's great seeing Kirk, Spock, and Uhura, and Scotty at this point. But how many times have me and you stated we need more episodes to cover everybody else because everyone else is going to get lost in the shuffle?
Yeah.
Or you might run into the problem that Discovery did where characters absolutely get lost and forgotten about.
Yeah. And listen, I love Kirk. I mean, he's my favorite.
Yeah.
I love Spock. He's one of my favorites. I love Scotty. I love the original crew. How can you not? But that's probably some of my problems as well, is that originally it was just Spock and Uhura. And now we're getting the entire original series crew, and it just feels like this is all the series is going to end up becoming. It's just going to be a lead up. And in that process, it's just going to remind us of things we've seen before in order to create consistency that they think they must have in the form of regurgitation and calling upon the past. It just... I don't want to be negative because I don't hate Strange New Worlds. I actually am enjoying it for the most part. But when you look back critically, you start to wonder after episode 9, like, what are they doing that's their own?
Exactly.
It doesn't seem like they can tell a story without relying on the past. And that's a shame because we saw what they did with the first season. We know they can, you know? So ultimately, David, I think the biggest problem with the episode itself, because we're talking about a lot of things now, but let's bring it back to the specific episode, okay? Even though I was okay ultimately, you know, with the Metrons being involved, you know, they're more of a conical nod. They're the connective tissue that lets Strange New Worlds tether its Gorn arc to establish lore while also letting Ortega's emotional journey stand strong, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so that works. And even in terms of themes, it works. But what I call into question is the writing and timing of when they introduce the Metrons. You have this highly emotional moment when Ortegas witnesses La'an shoot the Gorn, who had become her friend, who protected her, who saved her life. They bonded. And she falls to her knees in tears, and she's screaming and crying. And once again, the producers chose to slam the brakes. And that's what they did. They slammed the brakes on the emotion by having the Metron make his appearance. Why at that moment? I mean, I guess logically, in terms of story, it makes sense. But in terms of emotional narrative, why would you interrupt an emotional moment where we can watch the actor break down? Like we've seen Kirk so many times. Like we've seen Picard so many times. Like we've seen Cisco so many times break down. And the fucking director and writers never interrupt them.
Yes.
And here we interrupt the emotional breakdown with something that was kind of just unnecessary.
Yeah. And that's the thing that I think I've seen a lot in a lot of writing stories nowadays is people needing to soften your ending. Meaning,
imagine if that was the end, David.
Yeah.
She fell down crying. She was beamed up with the rest of the crew. Roll credits.
because then that emphasizes the moral of the story and you could carry that on into the next episode.
Yes.
And the problem that I see, Mike, and this isn't particularly just with Strange New Worlds. I think that this is a problem nowadays with a lot of writers who feel I have to hold my audience's hand and say everything's going to be okay. And sometimes that works.
Do you remember how, what was the name of the episode? The City on the Edge of...
City on the Edge of Forever.
Imagine if they, like, right when Kirk's having his emotional moment, they interrupt it with some unnecessary moment. When Picard in First Contact is screaming about the Borg and saying, what was that comment? Like, every time
they take something from us,
we step back.
And
he's all, we draw a line here and now. That's a horrible impersonation. I forgot her name, but when that woman that was in the show, the co-star, said, Sean-Luc, abandon the ship. Abandon ship.
Yes.
He screams.
No.
Imagine if they interrupted that.
Yes.
That's what they did. Your point, David, about this new trend with directors and writers wanting to hold your hand and not let you off. Like, they let you off the emotional hook rather than letting us dissolve into sadness and feel the effect of the episode. They want to send us off with a little bit of happiness. And I think that's when you're dealing with heavy stuff like this, that's not the right way to end an episode.
Exactly. That's the thing I want people that listen to us that are writers and want and actually do listen to us. That's one of the lessons that I want people to walk away from this is like, you got to embrace the natural progression of your ending. If your ending is you're going to end tragically, end it tragically.
Yeah.
Embrace it.
Yeah.
Because your whole point, you want to get your point across.
Yeah, and I understand. And David, we understand optimism, that Star Trek's built on optimism, and people may say, well, that's not a very optimistic ending. You have another episode. You have another episode left. You can have one episode of morbidity and then fix that morbidness down the road with an optimistic flair. It's been done in Star Trek forever.
Also, for people who basically say, well, that's not optimistic enough, the journey of Ortegas was optimistic because she's the one that learned to rise above.
There you go. Yes.
It's not,
Optimism doesn't mean void of sadness and emotion.
Yeah. Optimism does not mean you're void of tragedy.
In fact, how can we understand optimism
without tragedy?
There you go.
And like that's ultimately the thing is like I actually saw this thread online talking about this episode, and people were like saying, "Oh, it was a good thing that they ended it with the Metrons because at least everyone ended up happy." And I'm like going, "You're missing the point, though. Yeah. The whole point of the story was so to actually show that we as humanity need to actually be unified
Mm-hmm.
with everybody, no matter what our color, what our creed. It doesn't matter. We should be working together, and we should know that if we don't, this is what happens.
Yeah.
This is moral implications.
Yep. Yeah. So setting aside those things, okay, I'm not going to blame this episode on some of the strategy of the producers themselves, because
Yeah.
ultimately when you take a look at this episode, the writer, the specific writer of the episode did a very good job.
Yeah.
Alan B. McElroy, and as well as the director, Andrew Coots. I do feel like they probably shouldn't have stepped all over the emotional weight at the end.
Yeah.
But ultimately, what the episode did, how it functioned, I was just fine with, and I'll give it an 85%. Now, the season at large, now that we're moving into the final episode next week, I do feel like this episode started off strong, had a lot of, or season started off strong, had a lot of potential, but it seems like it just fell into familiar, comfortable territory. David? Go ahead.
Oh,
Sorry, David. What's your score?
It
Sorry.
sounded like you were about to say something, but I'm with you there. I'm a little bit higher than you. I actually have it at 89, but partly because I rose up the score of this episode because I thought the acting of Melissa Navia, was very well done.
Yeah.
I think she carried the episode very well. This episode, portrayal and acting wise, is up there with like people who Pike's episode, Mbanga's episode.
Yeah, this is definitely entering the top episodes
Top
list,
character
yeah.
episodes.
This will be an episode we talk about for a very long time, probably.
I think so.
Yeah, it's one of those episodes.
Because Ortegas has organically become kind of like one of the fan favorites of Strange New Worlds.
And just the content that it's tackling.
Which is amazing when you think about it, because you have this brand new character who is shining above legacy characters. Let's put that into perspective. Her character, Ortegas, is surrounded by Spock, Pike, Uhura, Kirk, Scotty, and honestly, if you look at a lot of fan chatter, everyone loves this character.
Yeah.
Like she's organically grown, much like how some Discovery characters have grown. So I personally put this a little bit higher, like 4 points higher, to an 89.
Okay. All right. Well, it was a strong episode.
It's a bounce back episode.
Yeah, I don't have any problems with it per se. Like, yes, it may have sounded like we did, but we kind of bled into overall thoughts on the season.
Mm-hmm.
Just because I felt like it was appropriate to properly understand this particular episode's place in season 3. And it is the penultimate episode. And penultimate episodes, it's not always the case with episodic formats. They tend to have relevance and bearing on the finale itself. And when you take not a fine-tooth comb, but a large scrape across the surface of this season, it does seem like the cosmological has entered the forefront in a way that's not accidental. It seems purposeful. And if that doesn't pay off in the season finale, I'm going to have to cry foul ball. Do you get what I'm saying?
No, absolutely.
It seems like, well, what's the point? Why did you do all this? If your season finale didn't tie it off at the end, that you didn't punch, you didn't give us that thematic punch to drive home the ultimate point of the season. So I'm going to leave us there. We're coming back next week to discuss the season finale, and I hope we're all smiles, right, Dave?
Absolutely.
All right, later.
Live long and prosper.